Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third Exceptional Individuals, Exceptional podcast. I'm your host, Nat, and today we are having a deep dive into someone who does something very similar to exceptional individuals, but the other side of the pond, and not the USA, but Canada. We have Sydney Elaine Butler, who is a racialized, queer, disabled, and neurodivergent founder of Accessible Creates in Canada. She has overcome life-threatening challenges and by 20 has now championed workplace accessibility and DEIA. Her intersectionality, her different identities, and how they have fueled their mission to support neurodivergent job seekers, and what the UK could possibly learn from a Canadian approach. Anyway, without further delay, hi, Sydney. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Nat.
Sydney, let's get right into it because I'm really interested to hear your perspective. So the question is, could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your personal story if you're comfortable?
Yes. So again, I'm Sydney Elaine Butler, and so my mom was born in Guyana, came here when she was quite young, and my dad's actually from the UK. But his family's more from the UK. He was born here in Montreal, but have a lot of family back home in the UK. And I grew up, and at a very young age, I realized I had a speech impediment, and so I couldn't say my R's properly, and had to go to speech therapy during school hours, and even sometimes over the summer holidays. Didn't think much of it, and when I knew I would thrive, I would also have to go to physiotherapy because of walking on my tippy toes and leg muscles, and go to speech therapy. And so realizing when I got those supports, I would do better and feel more confident in myself. And when I didn't have those supports, I would struggle. And then in high school, I say I was a chameleon. I blended with everyone because I didn't know who I was. In hindsight, it was masking to the highest degree, just trying to blend in and really find a place where I thought I could belong. But I was trying to blend in with so many people. And then actually in my drama class, which made me more confident in my speech and overall myself, we had a school of kids with disabilities that experienced neurodivergence. We had to integrate them into a play that we were doing. And so we started volunteering with them and hanging out with them, and actually got a summer job working at a recreational department at my local city, helping kids, teens, and adults with disabilities, while also becoming more aware of my own identities and my own experiences in relation to disability. And while at the same time, I was studying human resources at school and post-secondary. I was at state college and then went to university. Realized that businesses and HR weren't really inclusive and accessible to people like me. And so made it my mission, okay, I'm going to have this as my goal when I go into human resources to brand myself out from my other competitors in the HR world. And I graduated in 2020 during the pandemic. And as you can imagine, it was very difficult. I was lucky enough that I was class to put myself out there, was a volunteer for HR organizations or any way I can get myself out there. Working at a startup, he wanted to create an HR app, learned a lot about myself and what it takes to run a company with him and the HR background, and realized he had so many ideas, but it was a struggle to actually implement them. And I was like, I'm passionate about accessibility. He was all with a map and didn't know what to focus on. Then I actually got a traditional HR job for 8 weeks. I was in a remote position as an HR clerk and was again transparent about my passion for accessibility. And they were like, okay, we have the AODA in the province I live in Canada, which is an accessibility legislation. And so I was helping them rewrite it, make modifications to it, and make it even better. We also had to do a multi-year plan with that. We made them come up with a multi-year plan to actually implement this more moving forward. And so then I actually had to go back to the startup at the end of that. But at the same time, I was like, maybe I can do my own thing, providing training, consulting on policies, using my unique skills to move this work forward. And so that's how I ended up founding Accessible Creates in 2021.
You mentioned that your father was from the UK, right? Have you visited the UK much?
No, so we were actually supposed to go in 2020. We had this whole big thing planned to we're going to go visit his family, the little Baron Furness, and go to London, go to the Harry Potter. We were going to go to Scotland, go to Edinburgh, and then the pandemic happened. So unfortunately, it did not happen.
I wanted to know, from your perspective, do you know what the neurodivergent and disability inclusion scene is like in Canada in comparison to the UK? Are you guys doing better, worse, something different?
Yeah. And so I connect with people all over the world, which I'm so fortunate for. And actually did a neurodiversity conference that was based more on the UK side, because the organizer was from Canada. He moved to the UK and now he's doing different. So interesting how everything's so connected. But I think my understanding is that the UK has significant supports in place and different resources. And I think the UK is still ahead in this way, and that Canada's catching up, because some people reach out to me in Canada, right? They're like, oh, we finally found you. So glad we found you. And I'm like, there's other people doing this work in Canada like me, but it feels like it's more vocalized in the UK. People like, I keep seeing people from the UK doing this work. It's more marketed. There's work being done, but I think everything is so siloed when it comes to this work sometimes that it's hard to really understand who's really doing this work unless it's like really in your face. And I think the UK is doing a really good job at understanding, and then on the employment side of things, and it's funny because it's what I'm focusing on here in Canada.
Yeah.
So having more individual support for the individual for the whole lifelong, right? In Canada, it's sporadic support. You get that support when you're in school, both elementary school, which is when you're like 6 to 10, and then there'll be middle school and high school and post-secondary school. And then the things for employment, that seems to be where we're. And so I think there's just different resources provided at different times. And I think that the world is trying to, in general, become more disability inclusion focused. But I think also here in Canada now, it seems like a lot of people are interested in neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, but are missing that disability inclusion piece. And so I'm really trying to advocate for that, because a lot of people reach, oh, you talk about neurodiversity. I can talk about disability inclusion too. And I sprinkle that in all my work I do is disability inclusion and neuroinclusion, because I really don't think you can separate them, but people try and separate them, even more so here in Canada.
That's interesting you mentioned that. I often use the term flavor of the month, depending on what popular people will want. Oh, Nat, can you focus on autism today or dyspraxia? I was like, I can't really do one and not the other, because everything is so interlinked. It's also quite interesting that your experience of where Canada is at compared to the UK is quite similar to what I've experienced working with a few Canadian companies. Most of our traffic from our website comes from the US, and they seem to be quite far away from where the rest of Europe is in understanding. Now, as you probably are very well aware of, with some of the statements and comments that President Trump has said around DEI, and some of the big American companies have started to roll back their initiatives. I'm curious to know, as Canada is such close partners with America, have you noticed any backlash or any consequences from that yet?
So I think myself personally, I've always wanted to work with clients and companies that are really passionate about this work and like coming from a more authentic place. I think the companies that generally do care about their people and their well-being and realize how important it is are still doing this work.
Yeah.
So I think what Canada very much does follow the US is sometimes, I always say that US is like in your face, this is what we're doing. Like if they're doing something well, they show in your face. If they're doing something, they want to get rid of something, or they're angry about something, it's also in your face. In Canada, more overt about it. We hide it away. We want to maintain this image that we're doing a good job in so many areas, especially in this area. But it's like sweeping under the rug, basically. Right? It's no, wait, that's a problem. And it's just, nope, just keep going. Nothing's wrong here. And when it comes to this work.
That's interesting. From my perspective, I do see Canada like a hybrid culture between the USA and the UK. Here, while on the surface, it might look like we are making great headway, we are very passive exclusionists, passive racists, passive like anti-LGBT. It's not, we don't shout about it, but it's very much a thing. So with the UK, it's very hard to know exactly where you stand. And that kind of brings me nicely onto the next question, which talks about, because you have intersecting identities, be it your racial background, sexuality, ability, and neurodivergence, have these kind of different aspects of you, have they influenced your work?
It has heavily influenced my work. And I think even brought me to this work in the first place, frankly, that my own lived experience of these things is, some people you have the lived experience, they just only care about the lived experience. My own lived experience really brings this to the forefront. But let's find someone that's more racialized than me, more queer, more disabled, more neurodivergent, and really taking those stories into account and those lives into account, because I know my experiences, and I know I've been very fortunate with having really inclusive workplaces and also having not very inclusive workplaces. We're all a mixed blend of our good and bad experiences in life, and how do we take that with us and move the needle, right? And so sometimes this work is extra heavy, or when the client's not getting something.
I don't know if this is something you're able to answer, but is there like a percentage of you consider important to you, such as via experience and professional background? Like what do you put more emphasis on? Your own life experience or your background in HR?
I try to really blend the two as much as I possibly can. But I think it's something, even like I talk about disclosure and helping employees disclose or helping job seekers disclose. And so I think, but sometimes it's like for my own safety, still, it's like just focusing on the HR background and the technical knowledge that I have, because in order to first reach us out into really being the safe spaces, because our safety is the most important thing at the end of the day.
Are you saying that you still don't feel psychologically safe to open up with your different backgrounds? Is it something that you keep to yourself until you feel comfortable, or is it not like that?
It depends. So really understanding that sometimes same like the energy of the room, either it's the virtual energy, and you're just like, are you just using me because I have these backgrounds and because? And
are you like a token gesture, or
exactly? They didn't really care about my experience and my skills that I'm bringing to them. They were like, how many different others are you, basically? Exactly, and just, you're gonna love my answer, but I don't want to. I didn't want to say it, because it's like, oh, you're just trying to tick box and be like, well, see, we found this person that ticks all these boxes, and because then that's going to translate also to how they interact with the employees. And I'm not afraid of her work, but it's like, that tells me everything I need to know about your current climate at your workplace and how you view people. And that's not the kind of client I want to work with, because you're going to use it to tick box and then move on.
While I might be a white straight male, I do resonate quite a lot. I have dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and OCD. People don't realize that these areas, they all go together. For instance, if you are born a female, the likelihood of you getting a diagnosis is a lot less. If you are from a minority background, the chances of getting a diagnosis is a lot less. If you are neurodivergent, you're more likely to be from the LGBT community. And the reason for that, which is really interesting, just so people are clear, not, as far as I'm aware, no genetic links. It's about the fact that you are more open to exploring your own identity. So you're more likely to ask those thought-provoking questions, such as, why am I the way I am? So it makes perfect sense why you would have X, Y, Z.
Yeah. And I think even like some of my peers, they were like, you can't possibly have all those lived experiences. I'm like, why not?
I reckon it's because you've spent more time thinking about yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think taking that moment to reflect and be like, okay, how do I show up in the world? And then based on my identities, how does the world see me? And so I think understanding, okay, how do I want to be perceived by the world, but how is the world going to perceive me? And really breaking it down to that, because you could see yourself a certain way with your identities, and someone else can see it completely. I think obviously there's negatives to it, like I'm in with my identity sometimes, but it's also, I found so much of who I am through my identities. And I think with specific identities too, some people are like, oh, there's a negative connotation around being neurodivergent or having a disability or being racial, like all these things in society. Why is that a negative? Why can that help me enforce my work or do a better job or have different lived experience that I can bring to the table?
I often like to compare it to my eye color. I've got blue eyes, I have blonde hair, and no one would criticize me for, you've got everything, don't you? You briefly mentioned about your work in supporting job seekers, and I would like to explore that a little bit more from the Canadian perspective. What hurdles do neurodivergent/disabled job seekers face in Canada, and how do you help them self-advocate? I'm guessing that maybe there'll be a lot of similarities in the UK, but there also might be unique problems which maybe aren't as apparent here.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, so we were mandated to have accommodation statement on job postings and job ads and job descriptions. Some companies don't do it though, even though it's mandated, they don't do it. And usually if it is on the job description, it's at the end of the job description. And I'm like, it should be at the top because no one goes to at least at the bottom at that point. And so about people, job seekers don't even know they can be accommodated, or they don't know the parameters in which they can actually be accommodated. It's just, again, it's not in your face. So people are like, can I really ask, or do I have to disclose exactly what specific disability or neurodivergence I'm experiencing to get to the accommodation? And so that's a huge hurdle that a lot of them face. And then also interviews are daunting to anyone. And so not having that support to actually do an interview, we have, I think, interviews all over the world, but really focusing on the situational and behavioral questions in the interview. And so taking questions too seriously or too literally. I remember when I first had my first interview, they asked me, what is your weakness? I was like, I can't remember my answer because it was 10 years ago, but I took that question very literally. And they was like, that's not what we're looking for. I mean, you just asked me my weakness. Like, I think I'm bad at throwing, for example, like something like I was bad at something because again, it's for the recreational job. So it's very literal about that response. But they're like, no. And then I went to study HR and they were like, I'm like, oh, event. Okay, what are you bad at? But how do you plan to improve what you're bad at? Because it's the question, right? And I always use that example because I was like, me personally, I had that experience with that question, and I know a lot of people do, because that question is so vague and not very, instead of say, what is your weakness and how are you working on it? It's a whole question, right? And so developing it that way. And so I think another hurdle is that during the pandemic, the world basically all went remote. And now companies are slowly opening up, and people that are neurodivergent or disabled prefer remote because they can control the working environment, have the flexibility from working from home. And so companies like, nope, we have to go back in the office. And so that's daunting and scary. And so we're even having interviews again back on site and back in person, when it's like we realized during the pandemic we could have remote interviews because that makes it more accessible to people everywhere from their own homes or wherever they are. And again, they can create that space that's fully accommodating for them. And it's isn't it completely imperative to go on site to do this interview? It's previously wasn't. And so it's going to take a lot of energy for both ND and disabled folks who maybe go to the interview. Because I remember having interviews beforehand, and it was like, okay, I have to go here for this specific, it's like a building, but it's like, where in the building do I go? And it's a lot of, and job seekers are like, I'm scared, like I'm stressed, like I had to practice the route to get to this interview. And so there's so many different hurdles, but I think the biggest one is not knowing how they can be accommodated during the hiring process, or the accommodations for when they're actually in the workplace. And even then, I might not even get accommodated in the workplace. And so it almost feels like accommodation or adjustment, as it's also known as a myth. And so it's okay, understanding. I'm like, and so how I help them is to self-advocate. And I'm like, self-advocating is easier said than done. I had trouble to this day, telling you stuff. Like, I literally am transparent with them that I'm like, it's still a work for me, progress for me, and it's going to be a work in progress for you as well. But I encourage them, what do you want to get out of this job? People, leaders are now wanting more self-advocators. And so I tell them to them too, like people leaders and managers and human resources want more people that are self-advocating. And so I think a lot of people previously thought that self-advocating is like, oh, you're being whiny or you're complaining. But now, oh, you're taking that initiative to improve your work environment or to improve your interview process or your hiring process. And so seeing that initiative from the start. And so I encourage the self-advocates, like, okay, what do you, how badly do you want this job? Why do you want this job? And what would be a benefit of self-advocating for yourself and asking for what you need? And being able to communicate that is such a skill. And really reframing it as you deserve to self-advocate and you deserve to get your needs met.
There's a lot of obviously improving self-advocacy, which of course is really invaluable. But I would also like to know a bit more, if you are aware of it, the kind of the legality of organizations, particularly in Canada, have to do. For example, in the UK, we have the Equality Act 2010, which classes divergent conditions as disabilities, which means people are entitled to reasonable adjustments, and also that employers aren't allowed to in theory discriminate against you for being ND. Do you have a one-for-one policy for that, or to your understanding, are there like things that are a bit different?
So at times things are a bit different. For example, we had one in the ADA in America, and the Trump took that away. We didn't even have that. And so I think it's more seems to be like case by case, or we have like legislation. Like I said, like in my local province, we have the AODA and we have the Accessible Canada Act, but it's still very vague in its language and it doesn't really outline, okay, how are we protecting people with disabilities that are also neurodivergent? Or when I think it's because also the AODA, for example, it said it's 20 years to make our province fully accessible in all areas: employment, transportation, customer service, all these different things. Taking a step back to understand how do we define, and this has very workplace-based definition around disabilities. If you get injured at work for it's very high level, and it's more for like when you have to go on disability leave, rather than actually accommodating you on the day-to-day of the workplace.
Is it that it's done province by province, similar to United States, or do you have a countrywide when legislation comes into place?
So we have the Accessible Canada Act, but even then that's just for federally regulated employees, because we have federally regulated employees and we have provincial regulated employees. And then some provinces don't even have accessibility legislation. And so, for example, Manitoba is in the process of, they just rolled out their legislation and now like reworking it. Some provinces don't have their own accessibility legislation.
That is actually quite shocking, to be honest with you. And yeah, there's not really words for that. I think it just makes me feel very fortunate that in the UK, while I think most people with a similar background would say it's a very flawed system, at least it's something to build off of. You did mention about with the going back to the self-advocacy about the adjustments and not always knowing what you need to get the best out of you. And I know that's what you do in your day job. Just from your personal perspectives, I would like to know, how can employers tailor accommodations to each person while respecting organizational wide policies? So in a nutshell, companies have their own structures and systems, yet you have your own unique needs. How might that kind of be without you becoming the difficult troublemaker?
Yeah, so I actually just finished writing an accommodation policy for a company, and they had the accommodations they were currently doing. I was like, this is amazing. But there's also other accommodations here that employees might need, again, case by case. And so we left a section where it's like, if there's any other accommodation questions you might have or needs you might have, reach out to your manager and to discuss further in human resources to see what solution makes the best sense for you, and really adding that openness. And so giving those recommended things, and that's what the company is currently doing. That's how they previously accommodated employees, but also leaving that space because, again, everyone's different. And even having a section where it's like saying accommodation menu. So this is what you can potentially choose from. And again, if you have anything outside of that, And then also being willing to try something else, but try closed captions. Okay, does transcription work better? And just, what allowing that flexibility when it comes to accommodations and really working with the employee to see what works best. And then actually a lot of companies have been bringing me in as an employment coach for disabled and neurodivergent folks that, they see that they need accommodation, but the managers don't have time to work with them on it in detail. And the employees don't really know what accommodations they can ask for, or they're hesitant to go for that advocacy piece. And so I come in, I'm like, you can ask for this accommodation. This is what you can suggest to your manager, and have that conversation with your manager. The manager comes back to me, or the employee comes back to me saying, yep, that works. And even just testing it after a couple of weeks or months, seeing how it's working. It's okay, great, the accommodation's working. I'm doing my work so much better now. I feel confident in my work. Or it's no, I'm still having trouble. And so I provide that third-party space where employees can work with me to know actually what they can do to be accommodated, and then just bring it to their managers, and then the managers can approve it.
Now, obviously, accommodations are great and they can make a massive difference. But typically when people think of accommodations, they often think of assistive technology or money, and it's really expensive. And it sometimes can look like a bit like a shopping list. Or even if something has been agreed, there can be a big delay. Managers typically want to know, what are some practical steps that they can take to create an inclusive workspace? So things that are like the more bigger picture beyond just individual announcements.
Yeah, I think even just talking with your employees, talking, if people think, oh, that's so much work and that time is money kind of thing. But if now we spend just having that support, being that ear, having that space available where employees, even just checking in with you, how are you today? And, oh, hi, Sam. Hi, how are you? And just having that human element, I think, is sorely overlooked. I think the world wants to automate so many things and move to so much technology in the world. How can I support someone? How? And then really understanding by doing that, it's going to increase the communication, have people be more vocal about when they are struggling and that they might need support. And the support doesn't have to cost money. Like just modifying, you can't switching out job tasks. For example, I was speaking at a company and they said they had a person that was supposed to, she's a typer, and she actually switched with someone that a day because that was an accommodation she needed. So she just switched the position, the task she was doing that day with someone else in our team, where you actually really get to know your employees. I think also being able to have different tools to pull from as a manager to really understand, okay, do I know enough? Do I have things in my back pocket that I can pull from to be able to support my employees? Do I know how? I feel like the issue with managers is sometimes they're just thrown in that position. They're kind of good at their previous job. And so you have you're doing training to really make sure you have those people skills, right? And so that's a huge other practical step. Or advocating to get more. So I'm good at what I do, and I know this job, but my people skills, and I want to polish up my people skills and polish how my interpersonal skills and how I work and support a team, lead a team.
That reminds me of a quote our CEO Danny always says, and he says when he worked in the bank, people were always promoted to the position of incompetent. And I think that really illustrates to me why managers will not necessarily have the knowledge straight away to be able to implement these inclusive practices, because you're good at your job, you get a promotion, but that doesn't mean you're now good at this current job. You have to learn those skills. And I think that's why having additional training from people like yourself and exceptional individuals and others is so crucial.
Yeah, it's like even like my partners to become a manager, he's like, I have decent people skills, but I never worked with people in this setting, like to be actually leading people effectively in a team, right? And so it really understanding, and it is disability related, but so he has that lady that is from Korea, and he took it upon himself to buy a keyboard and add the Korean letters, and that's accessibility, that's inclusive, right? And so it's what managers, I think sometimes managers, they go to become managers and they forget the little nuances of the day-to-day what it's like to be the employee, being the person that's under them. It's even like remembering the skills that you learned that got you to be promoted to a manager. Is there anything that you could have been supported with or we could have done better with if you had support with becoming that manager that could have supported? I think it's crucial.
It really seems like the key takeaway from what I'm getting from this is just to rehumanize the workplace, be more kind and considerate. We've had such a focus over the last few hundred years about automation and streamlining that we've lost touch. People are people, and that's the magic of it. And we shouldn't try to suck the life out of jobs.
Exactly.
You spoke about how, like, interview questions, sometimes you could take a little bit too literal, such as, what's your greatest weakness? Now, that was some time ago now. I just thought, why not? For fun, let's chuck it in. I was wondering, and hopefully worded in a slightly better way than the conventional way of wording it. Can you share an example of turning a weakness into a strength?
Let's see. Share an example of turning a weakness into a strength. I just think of that. I love Carrie Fisher, and she always says, turn your weak things in a strong voice. And so I think really by understanding yourself, the kind of like self-reflection, you can turn your weakness into a strength by being like, okay, why am I bad at it right now? Why am I not doing as well as, why is this a weakness right now? And how can I turn it into a strength? How can I flip it? Why do I need to flip it when the understanding doesn't make sense to do? And I think an example of turning a weakness to strength is, again, my speech impediment. Sometimes I still have a speech impediment. I couldn't say my R's, or I spoke too fast. I turned that into a strength by becoming a public speaker and using my in training. And I'm transparent. Like sometimes I have a stutter, and so sometimes I still stutter in conversations. I sometimes do speak too fast, but trying my best to still use my voice effectively and communicate my ideas, and taking that pause with what am I trying to say, and how can I present this information in a way that is tangible to the people, even just, sometimes in a meeting, if I feel like I'm speaking too fast, because sometimes I'm more nervous than other times, which I think is valid. And so sometimes even just sitting in the chat or asking someone, how's my speed doing? Or when people give me feedback, sometimes I've been doing trainings at companies and people tell me I'm speaking too fast. And so I take that into account. I'm like, thank you for letting me know. And so then I slow down if I feel like I just should ask that question. So I just quickly put in the chat, how's the speed? And then it's like, okay, I'm good. Or no, I do need to slow down, being more intentional with my thoughts, being more intentional with how my speaking speed is going. I'm not in speech therapy anymore, and my speech has gotten tons better, but there's always room for improvement.
All right. I'd say you passed that one. It seems that you are utterly human, but you are also adaptable. And I think that is a good way of putting it. When you were saying, rather than essentially spin the answer, which is what they train you to do, I think when you think of someone who will spin answers, you think of like a politician who will always reword the negativity. And let's face it, we all hate that. So why would we want to? It's about embracing that, yeah, these are things I struggle at, but there are strengths that come as a result of them. So I think the Carrie Fisher quote is actually quite a powerful one that I've not heard of before.
There's a longer whole quote.
With my dyspraxia / dyslexia, my brain often is working faster than my mouth is able to get words out. So I often get two words. I've got the word I want to say, and then I can't quite say it in time. So I say a shorter word, and then I end up saying both words at the same time. And I sound like a Dr. Zeus or Gobbledygook character. And I actually love that about me. I think it's very funny and very quirky. So I wouldn't shy away from it, because I think if you wanted, particularly in the age of AI, if you wanted to hire a robot, go and do it. But you hire a person because of everything that they can bring to the table and their unique perspectives and insights.
I remember I was actually recording, so I did a workshop session on neurodiversity in the workplace. It was from a company. We put it on for all across Canada, and I had to record videos to go along with that. And so I showed this to my best friend, who's also neurodivergent, and he presents a lot. And she's, oh, you're saying a lot, or you're stuttering, or your words just, and I'm just like, he's like, they're good, but they need to be more polished. And I was like, I think it comes across as authentic, but I hear what you're saying. And so I was going to film again. And I did film again. I recorded those. And so then they were more pristine. And then so I showed them side by side. And he's like, I actually the ones where you're stuttering.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about narrative and you're having your own little experience of that. You were right. And then I sent it off and I was like, if you have any want me to re-record, or I have a better batch. If you want that batch you said, when I sent it to them, they're like, no, be authentically you, and we appreciate that. And that was really an eye-opening moment for me. I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna stutter sometimes, or I'm gonna all these different things, but that's who I am, and I bring that to the table.
I think authenticity is definitely going to be one of the most sought after qualities in the coming years, to be honest with you, because there's something to it which I have spent most of my life kind of compensating. When I would make videos, I'd use AI to correct my eye vision so I look like I'm looking at you. I would remove my ums and my ers. I would use AI to change my emails. I would run jokes past people beforehand so I didn't offend people. And while all of those things sound like great proactive approaches on paper, the end result wasn't me. And I thought, yes, I can be offensive sometimes, but I also can be hilarious. Yes, my spelling is dreadful, but actually it gives it that kind of unique me to it. And my eyesight line gives you a lot of additional information. So I don't think a polished article, I think used to be the kind of gold standard, but I think, or at least I hope, that we are moving beyond that now. We want to see quirks, warts and all.
Yeah, I remember when we first started using webcams more in 2020, when everything was remote, and the thoughts going to have additional HR job. And I remember I had my professor's voice in my head. You have to look straight at the camera, And then we had some online classes, and she's like, look straight at the camera to practice when you're in the workplace. And I'm just like, I can't stare at the camera. I don't want to stare at the camera the whole time. I actually look at the person on the screen, and it's just like, you're talking, I'm going to look at you. And so even when I'm doing presentations, I look at the camera, but then I want to see the audience's reactions over Zoom or Teams. At first, I could still hear my professor's voice in my head, like it's at the camera, especially because you're presenting, look at the camera. But I'm like, no, I want to see people's reactions, and people want to see that your eyes go around, and it makes it more real.
It's always a combination, a balance act, I think, between making someone else feel included and comfortable and benefit from your actions, but also making sure that you do as well. So for example, when we have team calls, it is optional whether or not you go on camera. Now, that's a very inclusive policy for the other people who get anxiety, don't like being on camera, makes them feel uneasy. But what people fail to keep in mind, that as someone who I normally do in the delivery, I need to see people in order to read their emotions and to bounce off of them, because I normally struggle with where the line is with what my words. I said, sometimes I'm a little bit offensive, and seeing people, I'm like, reel it back in, or no, you're cool. So I think it's always about, for me, I think it's that transparency. So I'll be like, a good compromise I found in my team is, hey everyone, when I'm delivering, feel free to be off camera, but when you're talking to me, please go on camera. Even if it's like a couple of seconds, it will then allow me to read that additional body language. Anyway, I realize time is of the essence, and I have one last question that I would like to ask before we wrap this up. So my final and ultimate question is, where do you see intersectionality in the workplace going next? And what changes are you hoping for?
You said the word right.
So careful.
You're like very intentional about it. I think people are realizing that this work can't be siloed at both in an individual company level, at a global level, and in a country level. And I think really understanding that someone really brings a whole self to work, with their racialized, disabled, queer, all these different things, but realizing that, person's not just queer, they have the whole part of them. Even they have their professional identity that they identify with. For example, again, if you're an HR professional, you identify as an HR professional that's part of your identities and your intersectionality, right? And so really understanding how can we allow people to bring their whole selves to work where they want to work and feel motivated to do their best work. We spend so much of our lives at work, and really understanding, okay, how can we make this a good experience for everyone involved? How can we accommodate and make sure that we're more accessible and inclusive to the most amount of people? Because obviously there's still going to be gaps, but really understanding how can we overall create a more inclusive culture. And we've seen there's so many articles. If you have an inclusive culture, you're more innovative. It's a competitive advantage. And it's like, it shouldn't be these ways. It's having these selling points for having an inclusive culture. And I think, again, that humanization aspect is going to be so crucial when it comes to this, because in this, I think technology is going so fast. I think we have to take a moment to pause and be like, how can we best use our people, and how can we best motivate our people and make our people feel safe in the workplace to be able to do their best work and to put the best foot forward.
Thank you. It does seem that the theme that has went along our whole conversation is authenticity and being comfortable with who you are, but also for managers and employers to not see this as something they need really to adapt and to harness. And I think that's hopefully a very beautiful and uplifting message that, even if we're not quite there yet, is one that I'm sure most people would be very willing to get behind. Thank you so much, Sydney. It's been really lovely talking to you. I would highly recommend any of our lovely Canadian viewers to get in contact with you if they're looking for support. After yourself, and I absolutely look forward to staying in touch and hopefully finding ways of working together in the future.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Cheers.